Tonight, under the glow of American city lights, something unexpected moves in the shadows. At first glance, it could be stray dogs, scavengers of the night. But as the lens sharpens, the truth emerges: a pack of wolves slipping silently into the edges of a neighborhood that never sleeps. Have you ever wondered what would happen if wolves came just blocks away from your home? Would fear take over, or would you pause long enough to understand what they are searching for? The camera shakes as a group of college students, armed only with their phones, document the scene. Headlights flash in the distance. Sirens echo somewhere down the block. And there, beside overflowing trash bins, gray muzzles dig deep for scraps of discarded food. These are not monsters prowling for blood. They are survivors drawn into the human world by hunger and shrinking wilderness. Yet the headlines scream otherwise. Local news anchors warn of danger. Social media captions cry out wolves invading the city. Neighbors close their doors and whisper behind curtains. Fear spreads faster than fact. But the footage tells a different story. The wolves do not charge. They do not bare their teeth. One pup noses a plastic bottle, batting it like a toy beneath a flickering street lamp. Another adult keeps watch, ears twitching at every passing car. Their howls do not rise in aggression, but in a low, mournful chorus, as if asking the night itself where safety has gone. The students, caught between awe and apprehension, whisper, "They're not attacking anyone. They're just trying to eat." For a moment, the city seems to hold its breath, a fragile balance between myth and reality. Then, a sudden flash of movement. Tires screech. A metallic thud cracks the silence. One wolf stumbles, struck by a speeding car. The others whirl around it, circling their voices, erupting into a haunting, unified howl. Windows rattle, street dogs freeze, and even the passing cars slow as the chorus fills the night air. The howl is not rage. It is grief. It is loyalty. It is the sound of family refusing to leave one of their own behind. The students keep recording, hearts pounding. What they capture will spread far beyond this street corner, reaching millions who will see wolves not as villains, but as kin bound together by love and loss. And in that frozen moment, under the neon buzz of a city that thought it had no room for wilderness, people begin to wonder, are these creatures really our enemy, or a mirror of the bonds we share ourselves? What happens next will silence an entire neighborhood and forever change the way a city sees its wolves. When the first shaky clips of the wolves reached the internet, most people assumed they were fake. Wolves in the city. That belonged to fairy tales, not to modern America. But for a small group of college students, the encounter was real. And it would change the course of their lives. Their names don't appear on the nightly news, but their story begins in a classroom at a state university on the edge of the Midwest. Environmental science majors, young, idealistic, and armed with second-hand cameras, they had set out to document how wildlife survives in cities. Raccoons, opossums, coyotes, those were the species they expected to see. Wolves. That wasn't on their list. Meet Sarah, the quiet one of the group. Raised in a rural town, she remembered the legends her grandfather told about hearing wolf howls in the 1970s before development swallowed the forest. For her filming, urban wildlife was not just a project. It was a way of preserving voices she feared were vanishing. Next was David, the loud dreamer, always pushing the group toward risk. He believed that every story needed a hook, something that would grab attention. He wanted viral footage, something that would shake people awake. Then came Mia and Carlos, both practical, both cautious. Mia was skilled with editing, Carlos with logistics. They were the ones who reminded the others about safety rules, about distance, about never feeding or interfering. Together, the four formed a fragile balance of ambition and caution. The setting for their story was a city most Americans would recognize: high-rises at the core suburbs sprawling outward, and at its fringe, a tangle of highways, vacant lots, and green belts. It was in these forgotten corridors, where nature clung stubbornly between billboards and strip malls, that the wolves had appeared. America's gray wolves once roamed nearly the entire continent, but centuries of hunting habitat loss and urban sprawl pushed them back to remote ranges. Yellowstone became their sanctuary, Alaska their refuge. Seeing them here skirting dumpsters beneath the hum of neon signs felt like history folding back on itself. Yet the setting was not romantic. It was messy, fractured. Garbage bins overflowed behind fast food chains. Sirens cut the night air. In the daylight, joggers and families filled suburban parks, unaware of the paw prints pressed into the mud just yards away. Wolves, forced to adapt, had begun scavenging where deer once grazed freely. At first, no one believed the students. "It must be dogs," one professor said. "Strays, feral packs. Wolves don't live here." But the students had evidence: paw tracks larger than any domestic breed, fur caught in a chain-link fence, howls that echoed across the greenbelt at midnight. Sarah, clutching her recorder, replayed the sound again and again. It wasn't coyotes. It was deeper, older, undeniable. For the community, the arrival of wolves carried a different weight. Parents worried about children walking home from school. Pet owners feared for their dogs. City council members debated new ordinances. Headlines turned every sighting into spectacle predators on the loose. The word wolf conjured images of fangs and folklore, not the quiet scavengers Sarah and her friends were filming. The conflict deepened with every news cycle. On one hand, the wolves had not attacked anyone. On the other, fear spread like wildfire. People demanded action. Wildlife officials considered relocation. And through it all, the students kept filming, trying to capture what they saw: not monsters, but a family trying to survive. The wolves themselves revealed their nature through small details. A limping male, scarred across the muzzle, led the group with steady authority. 2 yearlings trailed behind, cautious yet curious. And a single pup, awkward in movement, darted between them with the reckless joy of youth. They were not invaders. They were kin, bound by loyalty, pushed into the city by hunger. The students chose a vantage point, a rooftop near the edge of a strip mall. From there, they watched the wolves pick through trash noses, down tails low, never approaching humans. Sarah whispered into her mic, "They're not here to attack. They're here because we left food everywhere." For days, the students returned, gathering footage. They documented the tension: how people locked car doors when they heard howls, how one local TV station aired stock photos of snarling wolves to dramatize the story. They filmed the silence that followed each howl, the uneasy balance between fear and fascination. And slowly, a plan began to take shape. If the world saw what they saw, wolves not as villains but as survivors, maybe the narrative could shift. Maybe, just maybe, people could learn to see beyond the myths. It happened on a night colder than most, the kind of night when breath turns to mist under streetlights and every sound seems sharper. The students had been following the wolves' trail for days, but nothing prepared them for what came next. Sarah balanced her camera on the ledge of the rooftop. Down below, the alley stretched into shadow, the yellow glow of a flickering lamp casting broken shapes across piles of trash. Then movement, a ripple of gray fur silent as smoke. The wolves had returned. For a heartbeat, the students froze. Instinct whispered danger. After all, these were wolves, animals bound to a reputation as predators. But instinct soon gave way to something else: awe. David whispered into his recorder, his usual bravado cracked with nervous laughter. "They're right there. This is unreal." The pack moved with a rhythm that was both cautious and purposeful. The scarred male led first, nose down, tail sweeping low. Two younger wolves lingered behind, watchful. Then, the pup appeared trotting into the open with reckless curiosity. It nosed a fast food wrapper, pouncing on it as if it were prey. The sight drew an involuntary smile from Mia, who murmured, "It's just a baby." But then came the tension. From the far side of the alley, a stray dog barked. The wolves froze, ears pricked, eyes glinting. For a moment, Sarah thought they might lunge. Instead, the alpha turned, gave a single low growl, and the pack shifted as one, keeping formation, ignoring the dog returning to their search through garbage. It was the first time the students truly saw the wolves, not as symbols, but as family. They weren't prowling to hunt people or pets. They were scavenging, desperate, resourceful, unwilling to surrender to hunger. The students' fear began to thin, replaced by an unexpected sense of compassion. These were not the villains painted by news headlines. They were survivors forced into a human maze. Carlos adjusted the microphone, heart thudding in his chest. "People need to see this," he whispered, "not the snarling photos on TV. This." The decision came quickly. They would upload the footage. But with that decision came risk. The internet, after all, is a double-edged sword. What if the video fueled more fear? What if people demanded the wolves be killed? Still, Sarah felt it deep in her chest. Silence was worse. If people only saw myths, the wolves stood no chance. The first clip went live just after midnight. It showed the pup batting a plastic bottle beneath the street lamp. It showed the alpha standing guard, ears twitching at every distant horn. It showed scavenging, not savagery. Within hours, the video spread. Comments flooded in. "Are these really wolves in the city? Look, they're just looking for food. This is hauntingly beautiful, but also sad." For the students, the upload was both a relief and a new weight. They had pulled back the curtain. Now, the world was watching. But the city's fear did not vanish overnight. If anything, the attention magnified it. By morning, reporters swarmed the neighborhood, searching for the pack. Neighbors spoke of sleepless nights of hearing howls outside their windows. One man told the cameras, "I don't care if they're just digging in trash. Wolves don't belong here." And yet, beneath the noise, something else stirred. Viewers from across the country began to ask harder questions. Why are the wolves here? What drove them to the edge of the city? For the first time, the narrative shifted ever so slightly from fear to curiosity. The students kept filming. Each night brought new moments of revelation. A young wolf carefully carrying a scrap of bread to the pup. The alpha pausing to scan the dark horizon as if remembering a home long lost. Their behavior, while adapted to survival, was threaded with tenderness. One night, as the students crouched in silence, the pack lifted their heads and howled. The sound cut through the city like a knife through still water. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't warning. It was a call, a gathering of voices woven together. The students trembled not from fear, but from the raw beauty of the moment. Sarah whispered to herself, "They're not dangerous, they're just trying to stay together." That was the night the project changed. No longer just an assignment, no longer just an experiment. It became a mission to show the truth before fear destroyed it. In the nights that followed, the wolves returned again and again. For the students, each sighting felt like walking a razor's edge between wonder and danger. Their rooftop vantage point became a second home. Wrapped in blankets against the chill, they whispered into microphones, their cameras rolling while the city pulsed below. The wolves moved with routine now. They slipped into the alley at the same hour like ghosts who had learned the clockwork of human life. When traffic thinned, when lights dimmed, they emerged. And each night, the students discovered something new about them. Sarah noticed patterns. The alpha always scanned the perimeter before the others fed. He stood slightly apart, posture proud, scar tissue glowing silver under the lamplight. The yearlings never touched food until the pup had eaten. They carried scraps to it, nudging, guiding, teaching. This was not chaos. It was order, family order. But survival on the edge of a city was never simple. Danger lurked in every shadow. One night, headlights swept the alley earlier than expected. The wolves froze, ears pricked. A car turned the corner, tires hissing on wet pavement. The pup lagged behind, paw caught in a tangle of trash. The alpha darted back, nudged it free, and pushed it forward just as the car passed. The students gasped from their rooftop. It had been seconds from disaster. David whispered hoarsely, "They know. They understand traffic." Yet understanding wasn't always enough. 2 days later, the students returned to find no wolves. They waited hours scanning the alleys, replaying recordings of distant howls. Nothing. Doubt gnawed at them. Had the city driven the pack away? Had officials stepped in quietly, relocating them? The tension stretched until nearly dawn. Then, from beyond the freeway, a single howl rose, thin, tired, but unmistakable. Relief flooded their bodies. The wolves had survived. They were simply shifting routes, learning, adapting. Still, adaptation came with a price. Hunger wore on their frames, their ribs pressed against fur. Sarah documented each change with sorrow, thinner bellies, slower movements. The city provided scraps, but scraps were never enough for a pack meant to roam wide landscapes. And then came the confrontation that tested them further. It started with barking. A large guard dog broke free from a backyard gate, charging into the alley. The wolves stiffened. The dog snarled, hackles high, lunging at the nearest yearling. For a moment, chaos threatened to erupt. But the alpha stepped forward. No fangs bared, no attack. Just a steady, low growl that vibrated through the air. The guard dog faltered. Its bark broke into whines. Slowly, it backed away, retreating toward its yard. The pack reassembled, shaken but unharmed. From the rooftop, Carlos let out a shaky breath. If they wanted to kill it, they could have. But they didn't. The students uploaded that footage too. Within hours, it was dissected online. Some viewers insisted it proved wolves were dangerous, capable of standing against dogs. Others argued the opposite, that the wolves had shown restraint, that they avoided unnecessary conflict. But the most haunting footage was still to come. Late one week, a storm rolled through. Rain lashed against rooftops. The students debated going out at all, but Sarah insisted. If the wolves are out there, in this, people need to see it. They braved the downpour, cameras wrapped in plastic. Hours passed before movement stirred. Out of the sheets of rain, the wolves appeared, drenched tails, low eyes glinting in headlights. They moved slower now, scavenging desperately. The pup whimpered, pressing close to the alpha for warmth. Then, in the middle of the storm, the pup collapsed. Exhausted, soaked to the bone, it curled on the wet asphalt. The students' hearts seized. From their distance, they could do nothing. Intervention was against every rule they had pledged to follow. But the pack did not abandon it. One yearling lay beside the pup, sharing warmth. The alpha circled, pushing debris into a rough barrier against the wind. The family shielded their weakest, turning a city alley into a shelter. That night, Sarah's notes blurred with tears. They fight the same storms we do. They care for their young the same way we would. By dawn, the pup stirred again, alive. The pack limped into the fading rain, silhouettes etched against the first gray light. For the students, the bond deepened not just with the wolves, but with their own mission. What began as a school project was now a calling. They weren't just documenting survival. They were witnessing resilience, loyalty, family in its most primal form. But not everyone saw it that way. With each upload, with each view count climbing into the thousands, pressure mounted. Wildlife officials called the university, warning that filming urban wolves could encourage unsafe curiosity. Neighbors accused the students of attracting the pack by their presence, though they had never left food or bait. Fear whispered louder than fact. Still, the students couldn't stop. They felt a responsibility now. The wolves' story wasn't just theirs, it belonged to anyone willing to listen. One evening, as the sun dipped behind skyscrapers, the alpha led his pack across a strip of grass between apartment buildings. Dozens of windows lit up, curtains parted. People saw with their own eyes a family of wolves threading silently beneath the glow of neon signs. And for a moment, no one screamed. They simply watched. That fragile silence became the proof the students needed. Fear could be replaced by awe, but only if people saw the truth. The city had grown used to whispers of wolves by now. Headlines had cycled, debates had flared, and the students' footage had spread far beyond what they ever imagined. But nothing could prepare them or the neighborhood for the night. Everything changed. It began on a crisp evening, the kind where autumn sharpens every sound. The students were back on their rooftop, their equipment balanced, their nerves stretched thin. They had heard rumors that city officials were planning to set traps. Tension buzzed in the air like static. Then, as if drawn by fate, the pack appeared once more. Shadows melted into the streetlights, the scarred alpha, the two yearlings, and the pup that had somehow survived every trial so far. Their movements were slower now, deliberate, as if the city itself weighed heavy on their paws. The students filmed in silence. Across the street, traffic roared, horns blared, and then it happened. A silver sedan rounded the corner too fast, tires screeching against asphalt. The wolves froze mid-step. The pup hesitated in the open. Sarah's voice cracked into the microphone. "No, no, move." The impact was brutal, a sound of metal against bone that seemed to tear the night in two. The pup rolled across the pavement, limp. The car did not stop. It vanished into the blur of headlights. For a moment, the city noise swallowed everything. Engines hummed. Music thumped from a distant bar. And then, silence. The wolves gathered. The alpha darted to the pup's side, nudging with his muzzle, pacing in tight circles. The yearlings whined, their cries rising sharp and frantic. And then, together, they howled. The sound ripped through the neighborhood. Windows rattled. Dogs stopped barking mid-breath. People stepped out onto balconies, hands pressed to mouths. The howl was not rage, it was grief, loyalty, defiance all at once. It rose higher, deeper, until even the hum of the city stilled beneath it. The students trembled as they filmed. David's voice broke. This will change everything." And it did. The footage captured not just an accident, but a moment that pierced the heart. The wolves' chorus was haunting their bodies, circling their fallen kin, refusing to abandon it to the road. Under the cold gleam of street lamps, they looked less like beasts and more like mourners in a cathedral of concrete. Sarah whispered, "People need to see this. All of it." As the pack howled, something remarkable unfolded. Cars slowed. Drivers stepped out, not in fear, but in awe. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, their usual barriers dissolved by the sound. No one spoke. They simply listened as the city was wrapped in a wild lament. Minutes stretched like hours. The pup lay motionless, but the pack did not leave. They guarded it as if holding vigil. And for that time, the city belonged to the wolves. The students' cameras rolled, capturing tears in the eyes of onlookers, capturing a silence that was deeper than fear. The pack, in its grief, had given humans something they could not ignore, a mirror of their own love, their own bonds, their own losses. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the alpha raised his head. His eyes swept the horizon, glowing amber in the light. With one last nudge to the pup, he gave a sharp bark. The yearlings obeyed, retreating. Reluctantly, painfully, the alpha followed, melting into the darkness. The pup was left behind. The students held their breath. Moments later, flashing lights appeared. Wildlife rescue trucks. The howls had not only silenced the neighborhood, they had summoned help. Rescuers approached cautiously, lifting the injured pup with practiced care. The crowd parted in reverent quiet. The students filmed tears streaking their lenses. That night, the footage uploaded faster than any clip before, and it spread like wildfire. Not just thousands of views, not just millions, tens of millions. Across every platform, the image of wolves circling their wounded kin, their mournful howls echoing through the city, reached a world that could no longer deny their truth. Comment sections overflowed. "This broke me. They feel like we do. I'll never look at wolves the same way again. Why are we so afraid of them when they show us this kind of love?" News anchors replayed the footage. Scientists were interviewed. Activists called it a turning point. Even skeptics, hardened by years of myths, admitted something about the howl had shifted the narrative. For the students, the night marked the peak of their mission. They had started with shaky hands and borrowed cameras. Now they held the power to change how an entire city, perhaps even a nation, saw wolves. But with the climax came consequence. Wildlife officials doubled down. Some demanded immediate relocation of the pack, citing safety. Others argued for coexistence for protected corridors within urban zones. And through it all, the students found themselves at the heart of a storm they had never anticipated. Still, when they replayed the footage, they knew there was no going back. The wolves had spoken in the only language they had: loyalty. Grief, love. The world had listened. The night of the accident spread like a shockwave through the city. By dawn, nearly everyone had seen the footage: wolves howling in grief beneath streetlights, a pup lifted into the arms of rescuers. What began as whispers on rooftops was now a roar across news outlets and social media feeds. But fame comes with consequence. City council meetings filled with anxious voices. Parents demanded answers. What if next time it isn't a pup hit by a car, but a child in the wrong place? Others argued passionately. They haven't attacked anyone. Why punish them for trying to survive? Lines were drawn. On one side stood fear stoked by years of folklore and headlines. On the other stood empathy, fueled by a single viral howl. Wildlife officials stepped into the storm. Their phones buzzed with reporters' calls. Their inboxes overflowed with public petitions. Pressure mounted to act quickly. Some proposed relocation, dart the wolves, transport them hundreds of miles away to remote reserves. Others suggested lethal control, citing safety and precedent. The word eradication began to echo in chambers where policy was decided. For the students, the conflict felt personal. They were called into meetings, questioned by officials. Did you feed them? Did you lure them? And the accusations stung, even though the students had broken no laws. They had followed every guideline: no food, no close contact, always a safe distance. Still, suspicion clung to them, as if holding a camera was the same as holding responsibility for the wolves' fate. Sarah defended their actions with quiet resolve. We didn't bring them here. We only showed the truth. But truth is rarely simple. Neighbors began to argue among themselves. In grocery stores and church halls, conversations turned heated. Some admitted they stood on porches at night, listening for howls with a strange kind of reverence. Others spoke of sleepless nights of dogs that whined at shadows of a primal fear they couldn't shake. Even among scientists, debate raged. Ecologists explained that wolves were drawn into cities because of fragmented habitats, not malice. "We built highways across their hunting grounds," one biologist said on a local broadcast. "If they scavenge in alleys, it's because the wilderness has been replaced by concrete." But critics countered, cities are for people, not predators. If we allow this, what comes next? The students uploaded more footage: wolves avoiding direct encounters, retreating at the sound of footsteps, scavenging only under cover of darkness. Their videos sparked empathy online, but also inflamed opponents. "You're romanticizing killers," one comment read. "Next time someone will get hurt." The pup's rescue complicated the narrative even further. At the Wildlife Center, updates trickled in broken bones, a long road to recovery. Pictures of the pup bandaged and resting spread across the internet. To many, it became a symbol of innocence of a family torn apart by a world they didn't choose. Donations poured into the rescue center. Children mailed drawings of wolves under moonlight. Hashtags trended. City wolves. Howl of hope. Yet in City Hall, the pup's survival only sharpened the divide. Officials argued the pack would surely return, searching for their missing kin. "Do we wait for that reunion in someone's backyard?" one council member asked. And so, proposals hardened. A curfew was suggested. Patrols were added near greenbelts. Traps were quietly set along the outskirts, though many questioned whether wolves would even fall for them. The more the city tried to push them away, the more people wondered if fear was driving policy more than fact. For the students, the pressure was suffocating. They faced threats online, anonymous voices demanding they stop glorifying predators. But they also received letters from across the country thanking them, urging them not to stop. One message struck Sarah deeply. "I used to hate wolves. Then I watched your video. Now I hear their howl differently. Please don't let their story be silenced." In that moment, the students realized the fight was no longer just about wolves. It was about narrative, about whether society would choose fear or understanding when the wild crept close. But even as debates roared, the wolves themselves stayed silent. The pack was not seen for days, then weeks. Some believed they had retreated back into the forest. Others feared worse, that traps or bullets had ended their story. Then one night, a faint howl drifted across the freeway. Low, mournful, distant, but real. Sarah recorded it, heart racing. She whispered into the mic, "They're still here." The howl reignited arguments. For officials, it proved the problem wasn't solved. For the students, it proved something greater. Wolves hadn't given up. They were still trying to carve space in a world that wanted to push them out. The city was at a crossroads. The decision loomed: relocate, eradicate, or adapt. And with every passing day, the weight of that choice grew heavier. The decision, when it came, felt less like a single announcement and more like the closing of a long, painful chapter. After weeks of heated debate, the city council voted to bring in wildlife authorities to intervene. Relocation, not eradication, was the official word. But to the students, to the neighbors who had listened in awe to that haunting howl, it felt like exile. The announcement was met with divided reactions. Some residents cheered, relieved that fear would finally be lifted. Others stood silently in the council chambers, arms folded, unwilling to celebrate what felt like the forced erasure of something rare and beautiful. The students received the news in their cramped dorm room. Sarah read the statement aloud, her voice catching. "The wolves will be tranquilized and transported to a reserve 200 miles north. Public safety requires this action." Silence followed, heavier than words. For nights afterward, the students kept watch, hoping to glimpse the pack one last time. But the wolves, as if sensing the growing pressure, had melted deeper into the shadows. Only the faintest howls marked their presence low, distant like echoes of a story already slipping away. Then, on a night colder than most, fate allowed a final meeting. From their rooftop perch, the students spotted movement across the greenbelt. The scarred alpha appeared framed by the glow of distant streetlights. The yearlings trailed weary, but steady. And then, the pup. Limping, healed, but fragile, it moved with halting steps freshly released from the rescue center and searching for its kin. The reunion was wordless, but undeniable. The alpha lowered his head, sniffing the pup, nudging it into the fold. The yearlings pressed close tails, sweeping low. For the students watching from afar, it was the kind of moment most people only dream of, a family reunited, however briefly, against all odds. But even in that fragile joy, the end loomed. The next morning, wildlife trucks rolled quietly into the neighborhood. Tranquilizer rifles gleamed under the pale light. Officials moved with practiced efficiency, setting up nets, scanning alleys, waiting for the wolves to appear. From their vantage point, the students filmed every moment. Their commentary was hushed, reverent. They don't understand, this is goodbye. When the wolves finally emerged at dusk, the team moved quickly. A dart hissed through the air. The alpha staggered, eyes flashing before collapsing into stillness. The yearlings cried out, circling helplessly, until tranquilizers found them too. The pup, smallest of all, was lifted gently into a crate. The howls that night were fractured, muffled, but unforgettable. Neighbors gathered at windows. Some wept openly. Others stood stone-faced, convinced it was for the best. And in the middle of it all, the students kept recording, their cameras trembling as if to absorb every last detail of a story they could not stop. Later at the loading site, Sarah pressed her lens close. The alpha lay on a stretcher chest, rising and falling in slow sedation. For a fleeting moment, one golden eye flickered open. It met her gaze, calm, unafraid of final acknowledgement. Then, the door of the transport truck shut, and the night swallowed the sound of engines fading north. The farewell left the city strangely quiet. For the first time in months, no howls pierced the skyline. No shadows moved along alleys. The students felt the absence like a wound. And yet, the wolves had left something behind. On the rooftop where it all began, the students found tracks pressed into a thin layer of frost. Paw prints, clear and deliberate, ran parallel to their own footprints from the night before. Human and wolf, side by side, etched into the city's skin. It was not coincidence. It was reminder. Sarah whispered, tears stinging her cheeks. They'll never really be gone. The footage of the relocation spread just as quickly as the howl had. Millions watched the crates being loaded. The final glances exchanged the paw prints in frost. Some condemned the decision, others defended it. But no one could deny one truth: the wolves had left a mark that could not be erased. In classrooms, in living rooms, in quiet kitchens across America, people talked about wolves not as myths, not as monsters, but as neighbors. Temporary, fragile, fleeting, but neighbors all the same. The students, drained, yet resolute, closed their project with a final statement. This was never just about wolves. It was about us. About whether we choose fear or choose to see family in unexpected places. Weeks passed. The city that had once pulsed with tension now felt strangely muted. The absence of howls at night was its own kind of silence, a silence that made people realize just how deeply those sounds had entered their lives. For the students, it felt like waking from a dream, one so vivid they couldn't quite believe it was gone. But the wolves were not forgotten. At the wildlife reserve 200 miles north, cameras documented their recovery. The alpha, strong despite his scars, was released into a forest where the canopy stretched wide and the rivers ran cold. The yearlings adapted quickly, learning again to hunt deer instead of pawing through trash bins. And the pup, the survivor of a car's cruel strike, grew sturdier with each passing week, bounding after its kin with the same reckless joy it once displayed beneath city lights. Footage of their new life trickled back to the students. Shared by conservationists, those clips became their final chapter. The wolves were safe. They were free. But their absence left the students grappling with a question that echoed louder than any howl had the city truly learned. The viral footage had changed things. National talk shows invited scientists to explain wolf behavior. Teachers played the videos in classrooms, asking children to reflect on coexistence. Artists painted murals of wolves against city skylines. What was once myth and menace became symbol and lesson. And in the city itself, small but significant changes unfolded. Trash bins were secured with wildlife-proof lids. Green corridors were discussed at planning meetings, connecting fragmented patches of forest. Neighbors who once feared shadows now admitted they felt a kind of pride. "Our city was chosen by wolves," one woman said in a local interview. "We must have something worth staying for." The students, meanwhile, carried the story into their own futures. Sarah presented their project at a conference, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. She spoke not of fear or danger, but of empathy. We cannot erase wildness from our world, but we can decide how we respond when it comes knocking. David Ever the Dreamer turned the footage into a documentary short. It won a small award, but more importantly, it reached more hearts. Mia and Carlos continued their studies, embedding the lessons into their future careers: urban planning, conservation storytelling. Yet the memory that lingered most vividly wasn't the debates or the headlines. It was the image of paw prints beside their own pressed into frost on a rooftop, a silent reminder that wildness is never truly gone. One evening, months later, Sarah returned to that rooftop alone. The city sprawled before her, restless and glittering as always. She closed her eyes, remembering. And then, soft so faint, she thought she imagined it, a howl rose from the far hills. Not in the city now, but in the wilderness beyond. She smiled through tears. The wolves had carried their story with them, and somehow it still reached her. The story of the wolves beneath the city lights is not only about them, it is about us. About what happens when the wild meets the edges of our human world and how we choose to respond. For centuries, wolves have been painted as villains. They have been hunted, feared, and driven away. Yet when they walked beneath neon signs and howled in the silence of a city street, they revealed something undeniable: that survival is not savagery. It is loyalty. It is family. The students learned this firsthand. They expected danger. What they found was tenderness. A pup cared for an alpha guarding siblings, protecting one another against storms and streets. Their cameras didn't capture monsters. They captured mirrors, reflections of the same bonds that hold human families together. The accident that nearly took the pup's life could have fueled more fear. Instead, it gave the world a moment of truth, a pack of wolves standing vigil, their grief echoing in a howl that silenced cars and hushed voices. In that sound, people heard something universal: love, loss, devotion. But perhaps the greatest lesson is this: the wolves were never invaders. They came because our expansion left them few choices. Highways cut their paths, forests shrank, trash bins replaced hunting grounds. Their presence was not a threat, it was a question. Would we respond with fear or with understanding? The answer is still unfolding. Relocation gave them safety, but it also reminded us that coexistence is fragile. It requires more than admiration. It demands responsibility. Securing trash-building corridors, supporting conservation, these are choices we must make if we want wildness to survive beside us. For the students, the wolves' story became a lifelong calling, And for those who watched millions across the world, it became proof that empathy can rewrite narratives centuries old. So when you hear a howl in the distance, whether in a forest or through a speaker on your phone, remember, it is not only a call of the wild. It is a reminder of connection, of resilience, of bonds that cross the boundaries of species and cities. The wolves beneath the city lights asked us one question: will we choose fear or will we choose family? That choice belongs to all of us.